Hey there, friends. Welcome to the Connected Mom podcast. And, we're in the middle of a series here at the Connected Mom podcast about children's books. I love reading. In fact, last night I was laying in bed thinking, I think I have an addiction to books. So I'm going to have to find a cheaper way to get them. But anyway, I love it because one of my little granddaughters was down here over the weekend and she loves books. So as part of her birthday date, we ended up buying her 5 books that she picked out. And one of them she read completely before she even left to go home. And so today we're going to continue that series. And I'm excited about today because we're going to talk about the Tree Street Kids series, which has been published by Moody Publishers. And the author is a friend of mine, Amanda Eastep. And she has written these books, and they're really geared, I think, Amanda's going to correct me if I'm wrong, for kids that are between ages 8 and 12. And so if you're looking for a good read for your kiddos that are between those ages, I will really suggest this series. But first, I want you to get to know Amanda. So Amanda and her husband, get this, have 8 kids. I mean, she deserves some kind of medal. They're a blended family. They have 8 kids. I keep repeating that because 8 is a lot. 4 was a lot, but 8 is a really lot. And they live together in the mountains of North Carolina. And so she writes from there, and I just love her. And I know you're going to love her too. So welcome, Amanda.
Oh, thanks, Becky. I'm really excited to be talking with you today just because, it's you. And also I'm the same. I love to read. I've loved to read since I was a kid. And it's exciting to talk about the books I've, had a lifelong dream of writing. So here we are. It's wonderful.
So I remember as a kid that after going to bed at night, I would sometimes sneak a flashlight in my room, so I could go under the covers and read, and you probably did too, and it's interesting because some kids just love reading naturally. Like I have a couple of granddaughters and they love reading. That's their thing. And then, I have a couple of grandsons who will only read when the timer is set and mom and dad say you got to get your 20 minutes in of reading every night, and so tell us about your family. Do your 8 kids love reading or not?
We do have a blended family. We've been married. My husband, Dan, and I have been married 17 and a half years. So I didn't raise my stepkids. The youngest 3 were with us, on and off, and I got to spend a lot of time with them and become, closer with them in their younger years, and then closer with the older ones as, the longer Dan and I were married. So, yeah, and it's been really wonderful to see my kids have strong relationships with, some of Dan's kids and just kind of grow as a family. And we have 10, are we on 10 grandkids now, I think?
Oh, that's fun. How old are your grandkids? They're way more fun than our real kids.
Yeah, it's
a lot
quite
less
the
pressure.
range. Yeah, it's quite the range. And the youngest was just born. Oh gosh, she's only a few months old. So little Esther. We haven't met her yet. She's out in Washington State. So we're looking forward to meeting her. But as far as readers, my 3 kids who, grew up watching me write, watching me read, I read to them every night. And it was interesting to see them grow up and not be voracious readers. So that was a little disappointing. At the same time, I realized, and I do tell parents this, is that it's to grow in your children this love of storytelling. So, and I think especially today, and you'll see research on this where kids are scrolling so much that they're not getting a good view, even with watching television, even with television where you can see the beginning, the middle, and the end of a movie. They're just getting these little, blips of story or images. And so that's really it's really hard patience wise, and developing their idea of, oh, what's a beginning, what does the middle look like, what's the end, kind of that story arc. They're not really getting that. So although my kids, who are grown now, didn't necessarily love to read books, I did discover, and my middle child discovered, she likes to listen to books.
Oh, that's
So
great.
yeah, audiobooks weren't a thing when my kids were growing up, really. So she does love listening to audio. And my son loves films. He loves to sit and analyze them. And then my younger daughter, she loves verbal storytelling. So so that was it was a little bit eye opening for me later in my life to realize, okay, well, I might not have instilled the love of, holding that printed book, in front of their faces, but they, they really understand story.
Yeah, yeah, which is important biblically as well. And I think I'm glad you brought this up, Amanda, because I think we probably have moms out there who are thinking, I'm fighting a battle with my kid. They have to read for school. They hate it. And, we've all been there. I mean, my son didn't love reading. He'd much rather be outside kicking a soccer ball or throwing a football or whatever, and so they need to read for their adult life, but some kids really are drawn to it. So you developed this whole series called the Tree Street Kids. Tell us about this series. The first one intrigues me. It's called Jack versus the Tornado, and I need to get that for one of my granddaughters because I think they'd really be in that. And I think it takes place during the 1990s, which was a great era, right? We didn't have internet yet. The kids went outside and played all day after school.
Yeah, we were just starting to get, I think we got a home computer when my son was about 3, maybe. So that would have been early 90s. But so yeah, this is set in the 90s, and that was purposeful. 1995 to be exact. So there is still that. The kids don't have a cell phone; they've got walkie-talkies, and so
Yeah.
they're right on the cusp of that. Then not having the cell phones, not being glued to the. They did have the handheld games and those kind of things, and that does come up a little bit in the first book, but I don't focus on that in the rest of the books. The kids are outside a lot in these books because I love nature. I love being out in God's creation. That's a really deep love of mine. I'm actually studying this to be a Blue Ridge. It's called a Blue Ridge naturalist. So I'm studying for that certification right now, so that as I continue to write for kids, I can take my love of nature and science and all that and really integrate it accurately and well into my stories. But so yeah, so these kids, there's a group of, well, it's 4 friends and 1 little sister, because you always have to have
The
the
little
little
one,
sister
yeah.
on the relief, right? And they live in the suburbs of Chicago. Although book 5, on the request of one of my readers early on, who said, I would really like to see the Tree Street Kids take a trip somewhere. So after Dan and I moved to Western North Carolina about 4 years ago, I thought, well, I have to set a story here, right? So book 5, The Beastie of Brambly Bald, came out last year, about a week after the historic floods hit us in Western North Carolina. So that book didn't get quite the launch that I hoped it would, because I was just a little distracted with what was going on here at home. Yeah, but the kids, it's really it's realistic fiction, and so I like to include a little bit of mild peril, so that the kids, are having adventures, but in their mostly in their own neighborhood, and discovering how God really, what does that mean in their life as 10 and 11-year olds.
Yeah, I love that because I think like my husband, for instance, I mean, he loves adventure. And a lot of my little grandsons love adventure too. And something you said intrigued me, that these kids are outside a lot. And as I look back on the 90s, that is where the kids were. They were outside. And I think as much as the internet has brought us wonderful gifts and wonderful ways to connect. It's good for our kids to get outside too. So I'm glad you brought that up, because when we do a series on children's books and reading, some of the moms are probably thinking, "Yeah, I don't want my kids sitting inside reading all day." Well, that's true, but it's also fun if they can read something in the evening, maybe that shows characters that are outside, doing the things that kids love to do. I mean, I haven't read all of your books. Is there a tree house in any of your books?
There, there is not a tree house, but there is a fort, a very unusual fort.
Yes, there has to be a fort. I mean, my kids grew up building forts, and one of them is still bitter that we never built a tree house for her. No, I'm joking. She's not bitter, but she just teases us about it. I always wanted a tree house, and the tree we had in our yard didn't work for that. But I think these kinds of normal, well, maybe normal is the wrong word, but these everyday adventures of living outside and being a kid and exploring, that's what draws me to your series. So they grow up in the 90s, and these kids. So tell us maybe about which one of these 6 books are your favorite and why.
Well, I think your first book, maybe you feel like this as an author too, is kind of like that experience of having your first baby, your first child. So there's that feeling with Jack versus the Tornado, and Jack versus the Tornado. And 3 of my characters are loosely based on my 3 kids, and then there's other aspects of family members that kind of come into the story. And I know we're not supposed to do those fiction writers, but there's some little Easter eggs in there for my family personally, and it's been fun for them to kind of discover those. But so Jack even looks a little bit like my son Keenan. He's my oldest child. But yeah, that story is really, obviously it's not like Jack's really going to fight a tornado. I read one of the reviews on Amazon, which I really try not to do, because
That's
I
a
just
bad
don't
idea,
think,
Amanda.
right.
But go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think about them too much, but apparently one of the young readers got upset because Jack, our main character, wasn't actually fighting a tornado. See, yeah. So it's really this idea of when you start to learn more about, for instance, storytelling or novel writing, there's that idea of, there's the man versus self, man versus nature, whatever that versus is. And it's just kind of classic storytelling structures. But Jack versus a Tornado is kind of about Jack, this young boy who has a lot of anxiety and uncertainty. He does not like uncertainty, and that's kind of all he is faced with throughout the story. And so the tornado is kind of symbolic of facing that thing that you can't control, right?
Okay, so it's not a real tornado.
Well, it is tornado season, and we're in the Midwest, so you better believe there's and yeah, and it was inspired by something that happened to me when I was a kid, living in the middle of a cornfield in the Midwest. So yeah, so we experienced a couple of those.
Yeah, because I think, some kids have a natural interest in kind of the natural disasters, and reading stories about kids that have survived difficult elements of nature can really empower them to be braver and stronger. How do themes of courage and just kind of being brave for Jesus, how did those come out in your books, Amanda?
That's the most, I think, important thing about any kind of fiction, whether we're talking about Christian fiction or general market fiction, because there's a lot of wonderful books out there that aren't quote unquote Christian, right? And I mean, I don't even really remember Christian fiction per se as a kid. I was reading Beverly Cleary or Judy Blume, or those Madeline L'Engle was my favorite.
Yes,
Time.
yes. I tried to talk my granddaughter into her book the other day. I mean, A Wrinkle in Time. That is a classic. I might
That
still
book
get it
made
for
me
her
want
for
to be a children's
Christmas.
author, right? That, I mean, that was my inspiration. But so when you kind of think of the virtues, whether those are like the cardinal virtues or theological virtues of faith, hope, and love, and a story really needs to. There's this idea of forming a child's moral imagination. So rather than we're saying the moral of the story is, kind of like the old fairy tales used to do, we're drawing a child into the story where they're saying, "Oh, what would I do in this situation?" So our main character Jack has to say, "Oh, my friend Ellison is being picked on, or this is happening with my little sister. How do I react in this situation?" So with these books, I tried to, as authentically as I could, tell a story of how would a child react. They're not always going to make the right choice, right? So what has to happen over the time of the story is that character in any good story, they have to change, they have to learn, they have to grow. So something has to switch on where they're like, maybe they make the wrong choice and then they have to realize, okay, what do I do now? Now I've really maybe made things even worse. So there's themes of, like I said, kind of that, how do I deal with uncertainty, and where is God in my uncertainty? The second book, The Hunt for Fang, is really about stewardship of the earth, and what does it mean that these are God's creatures, but hey, this neighborhood coyote might eat my dog, right? My new dog I just got. So how do I care for God's creation when I that part of creation might harm me in some way? So there's so many different themes that I've explored in each of the stories. There's a lot of, of course, we have the big neighborhood bully, Buzz Rublatz. And so
Okay,
there's,
stop there for a second. Let's talk about bullying because that is such a hot topic today. Um, and I feel like that was really wise of you to include that in one of your books because, or in many of your books, because kids have to learn how to deal with bully situations. So tell us about the neighborhood bully and how the kids in your books deal with him.
it's been interesting, Becky, because even, especially in this most recent book, which is Jack and the Red Giant, that's book 6, that whole kind of bully story arc between Buzz and Jack comes to a head. And I was really kind of staying in that 90s, kind of that 90s era where it was almost kind of like when I was growing up. We didn't have online bullying, of course, when I was a kid. We didn't have online bullying. My kids didn't experience that. So it's been interesting to see how readers today are reacting to some of those story themes with the bully, because really in the 90s, a lot of times the kids were kind of on their own. It's like if I was being picked on the playground, it didn't necessarily occur to me or to one of my kids to go home and tell my mom. I just kind of dealt with it. So that's
Yeah,
been
that's
interesting.
interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the stories in the stories, that happens a lot. I do have very involved parents and grandparents. And I think that's really also an important aspect of these stories and other books where a lot of times you might see, well, we're going to get rid of the parents, or the parents are silly, and that's not what I wanted. I wanted parents who were involved as much as parents were kind of involved in the 90s. You're like, hey, go play outside. It wasn't a lot different than the 70s. We weren't as, maybe, as involved as parents are with their kids today, in good and bad ways. But so I think it's the kids do deal with things on their own a lot, but they also involve their parents and they get wisdom from elders. I have an elderly neighbor that plays a large role in the kids' lives. So I try to do that in the most authentic and healthy ways.
So you're working to be a naturalist, and one of the things that's unique about your books is you bring in a lot of like science or nature fun facts, and give us an example of one of those.
Okay, so I love to research. So throughout all of the print books, these aren't in the audio books, but in the print and the ebooks, we have these little, they almost look like sticky notes, and the Moody design team did a beautiful job of, making these like little, they almost look like little taped in notes throughout, but they have to do, they're integrated into the storyline. So I have each fact fits a character. So Midge, who's the little sister, loves science. She fancies herself a very short biologist. um, and so we have Midge's phenomenal facts. Those are almost always astronomy, science, nature based. Um, Sometimes Jack will have little things in there. He has some sports facts in book 3, which has a lot of Pee Wee football that my husband helped me understand as I was writing. That was one of the biggest challenges. Um, Ellison is our voracious reader, Ellison Henry, and so we have literature facts that if he quotes something, and then Roger is kind of our historian, and he has history facts, and then Ruthie is our other friend, and she comes in later with some recipes from her Polish grandmother. So those end up in books.
But I like that idea of these little like sticky notes throughout the book, because I think that that can capture uh, children readers, because I think that's why graphic novels have become so popular, because it's not like you're sitting there at a whole page of paragraph after paragraph after paragraph, right? These kids are learning to love like graphic novels or like Diary of the Wimpy Kid books where it's a little more like spaced out, and so I love these fun facts that are like sticky notes to your book, because if a kid is really into sports, it sounds like there are sports facts. If a kid is really into science and that kind of stuff, it sounds like there are scientific facts. So that could really draw them in. You have mentioned a couple times that you've heard from your readers, and I'm intrigued. So do kids write you?
On occasion, I'll get a letter from a child that'll be sent either to Moody Publishers, but for the most part, I had some amazing beta readers that I found in different places. I'm very
Okay, so our audience may not be familiar with the term beta reader. So why don't you explain that, Amanda?
and any author may have these. It's just a group of people that are kind of your target audience, and you ask them to read uh, an early version or an earlier version of your book and give you feedback on it. So I put together a group of kids. They were coworkers' kids. They were families that I had met through social media, because I wanted a good diverse group, not just ethnically or demographically, but just I didn't want people who knew me real well, so they didn't feel like they couldn't give me the most honest feedback. Yeah, so I connected with a lot of families, especially homeschooling families, through Instagram, and have really stayed in touch with a lot of them, and that's been really wonderful over the last several years. But so they would sometimes ask me, if we stayed in touch, they'd say, "Well, could I have your address?" And they want to send you a gift, or they would email me through my newsletter. They would email me a photograph. One of my favorites was a young boy um, created all of the Tree Street Kids characters with his Legos.
Oh, cute! I love
That
that.
was that was great. So that was fun to see, and see how he engaged in just his own way with the story.
Yeah. I love all of this, Amanda. Amanda, we are just about out of time. And I really want our moms to be able to find your books, and be able to get them for their kids and see how their kids do with them. So could you tell us where our listeners can get your books, how they can connect with you and all of that?
Yeah, and really quickly, I do want to mention there's some wonderful illustrations in the books by Aidan Peterson, and he's a phenomenal illustrator, and so that helps kind of break up that text too for some of the readers. They can find me on Easy Schmeezy, treestreetkids.com, And on that website, yeah, you're going to get free excerpts that they could read. They're going to get all the fun facts that you could just download and print out if you just want those for free. There's a link to a YouVersion devotional that's based on the first book, and then links to my newsletter. So, yeah.
Very fun. Well, hey, thanks for joining us today, Amanda. This is really, this is a fun series to talk about with our moms. It kind of reminds me, well, not completely, but back in the day, a lot of my kids read the box car kids books. Oh my Lanta, there were like 50 of them, and I think they read all of them. And it's fun for kids to have the Tree Street Kids, like this whole series, because if they like the first one, they'll continue on because they'll want to find out what happened to the other kids that are in that series. And I love that. So thanks for joining us today, Amanda. And hey, friends, thank you for joining us today. And I hope you're going to go out and peruse Amazon and start your kiddos on this series. It sounds like a great series. I love that it has adventures. I love that there are illustrations. I love that there are sticky note fun facts in it. That just makes it easier for your child to read. And so we're cheering for you here at the Connected Mom podcast. And we want you to know that we want our hope and prayer for you is that your connection with God is going to go deeper. Your connection with your friends is going to be more empathetic, and your connection with your child is not only going to grow deeper, but more intentional. So thanks for joining us today. And I hope you're going to join us again next week for another episode of The Connected Mom.